Hi everyone, welcome back to video number 2 in theme 2, our discussion on economic transformations in America. This video is titled the Gilded Age, and if you think about it, it's actually a really great name for it. If you gild something, it means you kind of cover it in gold and you make it look all shiny, but really, it's not real gold. Underneath, it's some other kind of metal. Maybe it's a tarnished metal. Maybe it's something that's not really a valuable, precious metal at all, and that's kind of a great example for what America is at this time. If you look at it on its surface, you think, wow, people are making money and there's all this ingenuity and this innovation and America's really growing. But really, who is growing from this? And it's mainly kind of the business leaders of America, the people who are the wealthy, who are getting richer. It's not always necessarily the average worker. And a great case in point is, if you look in this image, these are young children working. And at this time, child labor is extremely popular. And many cities and many businesses in America hire young children to do these jobs. And so this time gets to be known as the Gilded Age because it really is. It's kind of a false happiness. It looks beautiful on the outside, but underneath it's something very different and something that's not necessarily as precious and as wonderful as we often think it might be. When we talk about the Gilded Age, we have to talk about cities and the growth of cities. Urbanization. That's a big key word in at this time that you really need to think about. Urbanization literally means the growth of cities. And so because of cities, you have people who are pouring into them because as they grow bigger, they're becoming central points for American life. There's jobs there, there's entertainment there, there's indoor plumbing eventually, electricity, phones, department stores, architecture, things to do, sporting events, movie theaters. There's all sorts of reasons to live in cities. Many immigrants, when they come to America, they've heard about New York and Chicago and Cleveland, and they want to come here to be a part of this. And so at the beginning of the turn of the century, many immigrants moving to the United States are coming are coming to escape persecution in Europe. The Germans, the British Isles, the Irish are moving here to the United States in the 1880s, pre-1880s, to escape persecution. Often, they resembled many of the people who already lived here. They had high literacy rates. They were often really good workers and were excited to work. Post-1880, there's a different wave of immigration. Many people from the Mediterranean, from parts of Greece and Italy, for instance, Slavic nations. And many of them, while having the same work ethic and the same values as their counterparts who previously came from Germany and Great Britain, many of these people were much poorer. They often had less education. And so they become targets early on for anti-immigration, anti-foreigner sentiments. There was a movement in America known as the nativist movement, which means they were people who were favoring individuals from the United States, not foreigners coming to this country. A political party will even crop up and become quite popular, known as the Know Nothing Party. And it originally was a secret organization that really kind of tried to promote anti-immigration. They will have a number of candidates, but eventually kind of petered out. And their ideas and the things that they promote do take hold in America. There's another big reason, though, why most immigrants come to America. Yes, they're coming for jobs. Yes, they're coming for a new life. But for many people, they come because they've heard of this mythical place of America. For many people, immigrants, when they came to the United States, they reported that their family members and their friends had written to them about how the streets were paved with gold in America, that anything was possible, that you could come here and make a life for yourself that was unique and different and better than what you'd had before. And so you begin to see the foundations of what is known as the American dream. That if I work hard enough, that if I do the right thing, I can make it in this world. And while many immigrants are early on are taken advantage of and they're persecuted, they do hold together, and many of the traditions and the things that they bring to this country kind of blend together to make us more of what is known as a melting pot, kind of a big bowl of soup where people are coming together and joining America to make it one unique nation. Now, even though cities are becoming a very popular place, one of the things you have a problem with this time is controlling a large population like this. You have waste disposal problems. You have sewage removal problems. Most people don't have indoor plumbing, and there's no real room for outhouses, so you use things like chamber pot still, and people have to throw that pot of fecal matter outside somewhere, and those often go into the gutter, and then you've got and bodily waste can produce diseases and can make you sick. You also you have a lack of proper jail facilities. You have a lack of sanitariums for the mentally insane to go to. And so often homeless people are roaming the streets with no place to live. If you do have a place to live and you're not very wealthy, you probably live in the slums, places known as dumbbell tenements. Often they had one toilet, if they had indoor toilets at all. They had poor ventilation. And because of the close, confined quarters where disease could run rampant, people would spread it very easily. And there are stories of entire city blocks of, 300 to 400 people dying in the course of a year due to one illness outbreak because of the close confines. The picture here to the right is actually a photo from inside of a tenement house. And you can imagine that maybe 3 to 4 people live in this structure and how awful that must be and how disease could easily spread. One of the other problems with business or with cities at this time is that because they're now a collection point for many people, you're going to have belief systems that start to kind of converge all together. And you're going to start to have this kind of really big growth of political parties. And what's known as the machine politics or the boss system is going to take part. One of those people is a guy by the name of Boss Tweed. And he ran a place called Tammany Hall in Chicago at the time. And now Boss Tweed was a political boss. And what a political boss means is that, I'll help you in exchange, you give me votes. So for instance, he would help these new immigrants coming to America, get them a job sometimes, find them a place to live, and in return would just simply ask for your vote. He also would get government leaders to give him kickbacks. So he would take all those people, those immigrants who he said, you're going to vote for whoever I want you to vote for, and he would funnel them to politicians who were going to look out for his best interest. Today, that's a very corrupt thing to do. We don't let politicians do that. But at the time, this was seen as a kind of the way politics works. One of the things he would also do is that many of these mobsters and political bosses would provide services like garbage removal or education. They would provide infrastructure. They'd help you build business factories or roads or buildings. And they were often kind of seen above the law, meaning that they didn't really have to answer to judges and politicians because they really kind of told the judges and politicians what to do. It was like being a de facto dictator without really being elected or having a formal title of being in charge. One of the biggest problems at this time, too, is that politicians really exist solely for the benefit of interest groups. So if you had a loud enough voice, often you could get kind of what you wanted. Or if you had deep enough pockets, in the case of those political bosses, you really could do what you wanted to. One of the early attempts at reforming this, though, is what's known as the Interstate Commerce Act. And the idea was it was supposed to regulate commerce, kind of how people do money. But it was poorly designed. It was really hard to enforce. As a result, one of the things that really begins to crop up during this time period are something known as trusts. Now, trusts were kind of groups of organizations, almost like monopolies, that would really try to hurt competition, hurt prices, control the prices, control earnings, so that the businesses could make as much money as they possibly could. The problem with this is that it really does hurt consumers. Those customers suddenly are paying higher prices for things due to the lack of competition. When we talk about monopolies and trusts, there's 2 ways that you can be a monopoly. One is through vertical integration, that's straight up and down. And the idea of this, and like you see in the picture to the right, is that you try to control all areas of production. So for instance, if I'm going to be a beef producer, right? I might own the cattle farm, I might own the slaughterhouse, I might own the refrigerated trucks that I'm going to drive them in on, I might own the warehouses where I'm going to store it at, I maybe own the meat packing plant where they're going to actually cut the meat down into hamburger or whatever meat, I'm going to own the wagons that take that to the market, and then I'm going to sell this in my own stores maybe even, so I literally make money every step of the way. I'm not having to fight and have competition with anybody else. That's vertical integration. Horizontal integration means you literally buy the same companies that are your competition. So for instance, if I own computers, a computer company, I might own 3 or 4 other computer companies. I might buy them out and to try to own every part of the computer industry so nobody competes with me for selling of computers. One of the other problems at this time is that if you were a farmer in this country during the turn of the century, farming really is not as productive as it used to be. There had been misuse of soil, not rotating your crops. There had been droughts. There had been plagues of grasshoppers and other vermin who had killed off crop supplies in America at this time. And so for a lot of farmers, they simply start to walk away from it because there's not really much profit to be made in it. If you owned your land, you might be taxed really highly on it. And because farmers were a smaller segment of the population, most of the time taxing land was seen as pretty popular to do. Trusts had kind of pushed you out of business, but also things like barbed wire, fertilizer became harder to get. A harvester trust pushed prices too high. It hurts farmers. And so all of these things start to make it harder for you to make money. If you can't make money, you can't pay back your loan. And then you might even lose your land because you couldn't pay back that loan that you had taken out to buy your farm. Railroads also control prices of transportation. So even if you make it through all of this, you might have to sell your goods, send it to market in New York City, for instance. And the railroad would say, well, it's going to cost you more money to do this because we want to make more money, right? And so then as a result, it's going to be harder for you to send your products to market. Half of the population was farmers at this time, but they can't organize either. They don't unionize the way that the workers in cities do. And finally, the rising expenses plus lower prices for goods means you can't pay back those debts. And so what some of the farmers want to do is they actually want to make money cheaper. They actually want to devalue the currency. At this time, most money is backed by gold. If you had $1, that means you had $1 worth of gold, and you could go to the bank and actually trade that in. Farmers have another idea. And that idea starts after the crisis of the 1890s, where most people begin to, it's kind of the first major depression in the United States. Many farmers try to fight back against these corruptions, and so do many people in the cities. So while the cities are starting to unionize, farmers are starting to push back too. And a group of, or a political movement comes out of this known as populism. And it literally means the People's Party. And it came from a farmers' alliance, something known as the Grange in 1892. It's really the first attempt of farmers to kind of pull together and unionize and become their own political force in America. Now, these farmers want a couple of things. First, they want what's known as free coinage silver. They want a 16-to-1 ratio, meaning they want more gold taken out of the supply and they want to add silver to the supply. It'll actually devalue money, and in their mind, it would help them to be able to afford things better because money's not as expensive. They wanted a graduated income tax based on wealth, meaning if you did not make very much money, they thought you should not be taxed very much, whereas if you were very rich, like Leland Stanford and John D. Rockefeller, you should be making more money, all right? They wanted government ownership of utilities, so they wanted the government to own the railroads so they could control the prices. Telephone, telegraph. If you think about it, the game Monopoly does the exact same thing, right? You can own these things, right? And so they thought that's what we really would want. We want people to own this. And they also wanted the direct election of senators. Before that, there was committees who would be electing senators. Then they said if the people can vote on senators, the upper chamber of Congress, right? Then they can have more say, and the politicians will be more beholden to what the people say. At the end of the day, the populist movement really wanted to give people more control. They wanted to affect things like workdays and help people with their income. They wanted to restrict immigration because they saw it as, while immigrants had been good and had kind of helped out the economy, they also thought that immigrants were competition for jobs and for attention. And so they thought they really wanted to kind of push back on this. They even solicited the black vote, which they tried to get more African Americans to join. But that doesn't really happen until more voting laws take effect in the South. Then you'll see a higher percentage of black voters joining the populist movement in the 1890s. The election of 1892 really is kind of the moment in the sun for the populist movement. If you were somebody who is a free silver person, who you believed in adding silver to the marketplace, then you probably backed this guy, William Jennings Bryan. Now, he's not going to go away anytime soon. Many people saw him as the messiah of the populist movement. He was a man of the people. He's from the Democratic Party, and he gives this famous speech about the cross of gold. He's a very eloquent speaker. He's somebody who people really look to and think of as this, very high-minded individual. The Populist Party had a platform. They liked what they wanted. They had candidates even. But when Bryan comes on the scene, they really see it as there's not much choice, no reason to really have their own candidate. So many of them, the Populist Party really falls apart, and they begin to back guys like William Jennings Bryan. The Republicans build a very big war chest. They get lots of money from bankers and from anti-free silver people, because when Bryan becomes the nominee, the Republicans are going to see an opportunity, and they go to those bankers, they go to those robber barons and say, this guy's going to destroy your way of life, and if you don't want that to happen, then you should back us, right? We will help you if you back us. And so they build a big campaign to go against William Jennings Bryan. Millions of people show up to vote. But William Jennings Bryan will lose this election. And as a result, there's a kind of a major shift in American politics. For the next 30 years, Republicans will really come to dominate American politics. During the Civil War era, Republicans had dominated because they were the anti-slavery group. They were the Unionists. They were the ones who helped really bring the Union back in the South back together again. It had kind of balanced out as we'd gotten closer to the early 1900s. But by 1892, Republicans really begin to take control of American politics. And it's through having that backing of the banking industry, of the rich and wealthy in America. And it's because of that they're going to really take control. And it's not really going to be until Woodrow Wilson in 1912. And then later on, when you get to Franklin Roosevelt in the 30s and 40s, that you really see Democrats starting to get a hold again and starting to have real change in America. That's where we're going to stop for now. The next video we'll talk about is something known as the Progressive Era. And we're going to jump ahead a little in time and get to early 1900s and start talking about a guy by the name of Teddy Roosevelt, and how when he becomes president, even though he's not a Democrat, he starts to push for a lot of the changes that many of these Democrats had wanted for years. We'll talk about him. We'll also talk about people like Jane Addams and her movement to reform society, and a guy by the name of Upton Sinclair, who wrote a book called The Jungle. And that's really important. And some of you have heard me talk about The Jungle before, and you will not be disappointed if you have not. Until then, make sure you have all of this in your notes. If you have any questions, please come see me in class. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow. Have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye-bye, everybody.